Hi, and welcome to today's video. This week's video is about the ventilation systems. In this video, we'll be talking about the ventilation system in mammals, fish, and insects. So the main system of gas exchange basically relies on the lungs. So we have the trachea leading into the bronchus, which then splits into the left and right lung by the bronchi, which then splits further down into bronchioles, which then goes to the alveoli. We'll talk a little bit more about the alveoli in a little bit. But basically, the way breathing happens is your diaphragm will contract. This pulls your lungs down. Your external intercostal muscles contract as well. This pulls your lungs up, which increases the volume of the thoracic cavity. As there's an increase in volume, this means there's a decrease in pressure, which means air flows in from the atmosphere into the lungs. Obviously, for exhalation, for breathing it out, it's the opposite. So for that, the diaphragm will relax, the external intercostal muscles relax, which means the whole thoracic cavity decreases in volume, which increases the pressure in the lungs, which then forces the air back out. Now, the actual gas exchange in mammals happens at the alveoli. Now, if you remember when we talked about diffusion and how to make it happen fastest and how to make it happen most efficient, we talked about there being three really important things to have. Number one, a short diffusion distance. Number two, the surfaces to be moist. Number three, to have a good blood supply. So as you can see on the picture on the left, you can see that the arteries have a really fantastic blood supply. They've got lots and lots of little capillaries which are constantly filling your blood. If we go to a diagram on the right, you can see there's a really short diffusion distance of about a cell thick wall. And these are all also moist. This allows the gas exchange to happen at its most efficient in mammals at the alveoli. So that brings us to gas exchange in fish. Now, what fish need to be able to do is they need to be able to take the dissolved oxygen out of the water. And to do this, they use gills. Now, the gill structure is something you need to become familiar with. So I suggest you look it up in your textbooks exactly what the gill structure looks like. But you basically have gill arches, you've got lamella, and you've got filaments. Now, what happens is to take water in, what the fish needs to do is first open its mouth, second, drop its buccal cavity lower, and close the operculum, which is on the outside of the gills. It's like a covering, a sheath, if you like, on the gills. So once that happens, that increases the volume inside the fish mouth, and this then drags the water in. Now, by keeping the operculum closed, it stops water just flowing straight out over the gills. When the buccal cavity is full, the fish can close its mouth and then open the operculum, forcing that water out over the gills. And so you may be familiar with the fish bob sound that it seems to make as it's swimming along. This is where it's actually opening and closing its mouth, lowering its buccal cavity, taking as much water as it can. Once it's passed over those filaments, the lamella is where the oxygen diffuses into capillaries. Now, there's two different flow rates. There's current flow and concurrent flow, and that's what we'll talk about now. The terms countercurrent and concurrent basically refer to the way the blood's flowing as opposed to the way the water's flowing. So if the blood and the water are flowing in the same direction, then it's called concurrent. If they're flowing in opposite directions, it's called countercurrent. Now, what we need to remember is that blood flow from the afferent blood vessel, which is low in oxygen concentration, to the efferent blood vessel. Okay, so it flows around. And water flows across, as is shown in blue arrows in both these two diagrams, the gills. Now, if the blood is flowing in the same direction as the water is flowing, we call that concurrent. If it's flowing in the opposite direction, we call it countercurrent. Now, concurrent basically means is you'll get to a point where the amount of oxygen in the blood and the amount of oxygen in the water is the same. When that reaches, there's no more diffusion happens, equilibrium is reached, diffusion stops, and that water passes out the gills. That's fine if you're a small fish which isn't particularly metabolically active. You can get enough oxygen that way. If you're a large fish that you're metabolically active up to a point, obviously fish will never be as metabolically active as mammals because we have a lot more oxygen. We have better capacity to take in oxygen. If you're metabolically active for a fish, you need a countercurrent flow in which you've got the water flowing in the right direction, the blood flowing in the opposite direction. So you've constantly got fresh blood coming up against that water. So even as the concentration of oxygen drops in that water, the there's still diffusion happening because you never reach equilibrium because you've got fresh blood coming in all the time while that water's passing through the gill. So that's gas exchange in fish. And remember, in this, we're talking about a concurrent system, and this is a countercurrent. That brings us to the last thing, gas exchange in insects. So insects have a pair of lip-like openings in the thorax and abdomen, and we call them the spiracles. So that's these. You also have tracheal tubes which are connected to each spiracle and branch into a series of tracheoles, kind of like the trachea going to bronchi going to bronchioles, similar sort of system. Okay, so that's these tracheoles. And the tracheoles repeatedly divide until each of the numerous microscopic ends penetrate into individual body cells. And towards the end of these tracheoles, you have a tracheal fluid, and that basically limits the amount of diffusion that can happen. So insects basically rely on diffusion to allow gas to enter in from the spiracle into the trachea, into the tracheoles, then to the individual cells where respiration happens. So oxygen will come in, carbon dioxide flows out based on the gas law. The abdomen also beating, so when the insect's moving, that also helps to drive air in and out of the spiracles. But basically, because the insect's small enough, it can rely on just diffusion to get the oxygen it needs. I hope that's helped. Please let me know if you have any questions. As always, email me or put it in the comments below. And thank you for watching.